Right, we're at Esther 6, verse 1 to 8, verse 17. The tension in the story is rising. The king can't sleep. So that night he ordered that the recent history books be read out to him. I guess that's like the ancient king's version of watching a late night film because you can't sleep. And it's while the recent history books being read out, the king hears about Mordecai uncovering the assassination plot back in chapter 2, which in effect saved the king's life. The king was obviously struck afresh by this revelation and asked what honour and recognition had Mordecai received. The servants say nothing. And the king wants to seek advice and says, who is in the court? And I remember it's early morning. No one should be in the court. But Haman has entered the court early to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows. And instead, before Haman can get a word in edgeways, the king interrupts, gets in there first and says, what should be done for the man the king delights to honour? And in 6 verse 6, we get a Miranda-esque moment where it's like Haman turns to the camera and whispers aside, who is there that the king would rather honour than me? So this self-obsessed, vain man goes into a fantasy world and talks about wanting royal robes that the king has worn, riding a horse that the king has ridden, in effect, wanting to be king. He's already prime minister, but that wasn't enough. His pride and appetite for power is never ending. And in a brilliant twist in the story, verse 10, the king says, do all of that for Mordecai. In one sentence, the king starts the dramatic exchange of role reversal, with Haman going down and Mordecai rising up. The story continues with Haman and the king going back to the second banquet that Queen Esther had prepared, and Esther shows the full extent of her courage and discloses her Jewishness and asks that her life and the life of her people be spared. The king asks who's behind the destruction, seemingly forgetting that he'd mandated Haman to destroy the Jews, and Esther doesn't mince her words. 6 verse 6 says, the adversary and enemy is the vile man Haman. The king storms out and Haman turns to Esther to plead for his life. Here he is. That morning he had expected to slay the Jew who had not bowed down to him. Now he is bowing down to another Jew and pleading for his very life. Somehow he then falls onto the couch and the king storms back in and says, will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house? Haman is now a criminal, assigned to a criminal's death, so his head gets covered and some bright spark pipes up that they know of a 75-foot gallows that's just been built in Haman's garden, and in a bitter twist for Haman, he then gets hanged on the very gallows he'd built for Mordecai. This is a brilliant story outworking Proverbs 16:18, which says, pride comes before a fall. Equally true, James 4 verse 6, God opposes the proud and gives grace to the humble. We need to choose, are we going to humble ourselves or does God have to humble us? I don't want to be opposed by God. I want his grace in every area of my life, and humility attracts the grace of God. Then we see Esther once more courageously coming before the king without being summoned. The golden scepter is extended to her. Now she knows a decree from the king cannot be revoked. So she asks a new decree can be written and sent out saying the Jews could fight and defend themselves. And there's much rejoicing throughout the empire. So this part of the story is a lot about pride and humility. And the challenge for all of us is, will we humble ourselves or does God have to humble us?